I'm the Interim Executive Director of Coastal Women's Shelter, and welcome to our kickoff event for our 30th anniversary. I want to especially thank Carrie Ashcroft, one of the newest additions to our staff, our Fund Development Coordinator, who made all of this happen. Let's give a big round of applause. So, it's our 30th anniversary. And that's a good thing, and it's a not so good thing. That means 30 years of fighting the fight against domestic violence, but also 30 years of having community support and the resources to help victims and their families start new lives. And we couldn't be happier about that.
When I first moved to Newbern, I was not here very long before a very fine woman named Jean Nelson tracked me down and said, "Oh, you've got to get involved. You've got to get appointed to the Craven County Council on Women." During those first months and years, we moved. We never had a real place to meet. At that point, the Craven County Council on Women was serving both domestic violence victims and rape victims. When I first came on the board, we had no staff. And so we just volunteers, took calls, we did the best we could, didn't have any resources. Our board had no real money, but we learned quickly to bet. There was always one or two elected officials that would say, "Well, do you serve any men? You know, we can't discriminate," or something like that. And at the very beginning, we did not serve them, but we served boys, both from a sexual assault standpoint and the boys from families where domestic violence had been a problem. Domestic violence was a huge issue, a huge problem, and it was disproportionate. It took up a disproportionate amount of staff time, office time, and money. And there were some other people in the county that felt also that there needed to be a separate board. Now, concurrent with the development of a board, the Council on Women encouraged the development of the first Coastal Woman Shelter Board. And 4 or 5 of the board members served on both committees. They served on the council board and they served on the organizing committees of the Coastal Women's Shelter. As that group worked towards a 501c3 so they could apply for grants and work as a nonprofit, they could seek dollars from cities or counties or state and federal, as well as going to the community at large. They could have fundraisers or whatever to get the resources to serve those families. Inevitably, what comes up is we need a shelter. It became evident that finding the appropriate location was not as easy as it seemed. There was one house that was found, and in fact, the Coastal Women's Shelter staff and the Council on Women staff shared that location. And it said, "Oh, it's got these rooms, it's a big house, da-da-da-da-da." It was right in downtown Newbern. Well, first of all, it would have been easily found by spouses who could come to it. In years past, every legislator had an amount of money that they could designate to go to a particular one-time project. Jean Nelson and Joanne Shell and I decided to contact our legislator. Now, by that time, the Council of Women had moved to a little yellow house. It was called the Statham House on Pollock Street. So Joanne Shell, Jean Nelson, myself, and the father of our current DA, Joe Thomas, met in that tiny little upstairs, and we had all our stuff prepared. We want some of your pork barrel money for a women's shelter. We were just ready to argue all kinds of things. Okay. It was like, wow. Okay, I'll give you $25,000. And so he did. And the Council of Women had that money in a money market account until the Coastal Women's Shelter had its 501c3, had identified a site that would pass building codes and was acceptable, and had received a grant. At that point, many of the programs in the state were beginning to have two programs, one that dealt with sexual assault and one that dealt with domestic violence. There are still some that are together, but most of them now are separate, particularly if they operate a shelter, because that is a huge chunk of the domestic violence budget.
I have been on the board since 1982. When I got on the board, I immediately became the treasurer, and I think I held that position for 30 years. Then we're Promised Place, and we're going to stay that way, and I told them that you cannot change the name again until I die. But when I first got on, I remember Jean Nelson. She was the most wonderful lady in the world. She was this poised, beautiful woman, and she had a heart of gold. And when her first office, when she started, was in a closet in the new center. I remember the lady by the name of Beverly. She was the office person when I came on. She did both the domestic violence and the rape at that point. And she would take these little puppet shows on the road. It was from DSS. DSS had given up the program, and it was called
Penelope Peabody.
Penelope
I did some of
Peabody,
those
and
too.
it was the good touch, bad touch little programs that she would take. And the only county around would let us go in was Pamlico County. I remember Susanna is one of our directors, and Donna was our shelter person. A lot of these people have stayed with the agencies for a long time, even if they left, they're still part of the agency in their heart. And it takes your heart to do something that we do. It takes dedication, and I think that anybody here has that dedication and has that heart for the agencies by themselves. Sometime in the late 80s, when the girl down in Havelock High School was sexually assaulted by a couple of guys, and
On school property.
on school property, the principal kept her in his office alone for 2 hours and interrogated her. It was after that that we were allowed to come into Craven County and talk to the people about the Good Touch, Bad Touch program in the elementary schools. So that's a little history. One thing I wanted to tell you was that Linda Fine, she was the first person that started a special victims unit in the city of New York. It was the mayor that saw that it was a need in New York City. She was working as a assistant district attorney. She became the DA, and then she left that position and and she created her own special victims unit. If you ever get a chance to read her books, they're fantastic. They do a basic history about sexual assault.
Well, I'm going to tell you how, as the first paid part-time coordinator, when the Council of Women decided that they needed a coordinator, they had put out a small blurb, and I answered it. It was to make sure I got in touch with all the law enforcement agencies. because we needed to get up with them. Remember, the idea of the basic area in the early 70s and 80s, even in 1981 when I was hired, was a man can do what he wants to. Now, I'm not picking on men because domestic violence happens to men and women. And I've seen both sides of the coin because I've been in law enforcement as well. But the area was not trained as far as domestic violence. What is domestic violence? Law enforcement couldn't really answer that. Domestic violence is learned. It's learned in the home, and that's where it starts. And that's where our big problem is, because nobody wants to do anything about it, because it's embarrassing, it doesn't happen. Oh, it's okay for me to slap somebody, but it's not. Convincing the heads of law enforcement was, wait a minute, you're a female. You don't know what you're talking about. And that was a really hard thing for me to swallow. Because what has that got to do with it? So I persisted. I was a real pain in the butt. I continuously go back to all of these different departments in these 3 counties. They got tired of me. They didn't know what else to do with me. Now, my job wasn't to collect monies. They had the tough job. Mine was just to see if we could get training and get the people of the area to listen. Now, children had been killed, women had been killed, and so had men in Craven County and also in New Bern. How do I know this? Because the same year, in 1981, New Bern Police Department called and asked if I would go to work. Now remember, when I first came here, I went to the New Bern Police Department to see if they were hiring police women, and I was told, we don't hire women. So you get the total picture. Now what? Well, as far as I was concerned, they're figuring, well, we can't fight her, we might as well join her and get her in here and keep her mouth shut.
How I got involved with the shelter. I'm a survivor, very proud of it. I actually called the crisis line. It's a very hard experience because it never happened. I was raised by my grandparents. We come from a loving family. So I never saw my grandparents argue, not less to be kicked in the head with the shoe, stomped on, all because I said no. You know, I didn't want to do something, and I guess I just rubbed him the wrong way. Was a perfect gentleman right up until that point. Like I had been around with Muhammad Ali. My eyes were swollen. I still have an indentation right here in my bottom of my lip, and every time I say, okay, it's time for Donna Bradshaw to hang up her little crown or whatever you want to call it and just leave this alone, I feel that, and that's what keeps me going, because there's so many other people out there that don't know we exist, that don't know it's a problem. And people don't think about the children. There's so many children, so many generations that I have seen that we have 3 generations coming into the shelter, and that should not be that. I enjoyed you speaking because you have a lot of fire, and you tell it like it is. I really can't say it because it'll get me in trouble, but I'm being politically correct now. Oh, that's wonderful. But it's so many other generations that are out there that need to know that you don't have to put up with this way of life. When we first started out with Mary Ann, I mean, we were counting the rolls on the toilet paper to make sure we had enough to stretch it here. We were glad of any kind of donation. But I remember the little yellow house. I remember we had 2 executive directors. It was Beverly Moore and Eileen Linker did the domestic violence. So we have really grown from that, and now we have a new intern director, Miss Susan over there. So it's still growing. And Promise Place has really grown. It warms my heart to see that, because it is something that people don't talk about. And you got another one of me right there. So, but it has grown. I have enjoyed working here. Like I said, every time I say it's time to go, some little child grabs me or something and it makes me stay. But that's just it. Any questions? I can't think of anything else to say. This is not my forte, so. I do think the other two directors should get up and speak about their experience. Don't we think that? Can we get them up here?
Good afternoon, everyone. We're used to raising our voices and projecting our voices, and we have talked so many times about domestic violence and the need that is out there. Suzanne was gracious enough to serve as executive director twice. So
Mary Ann could retire.
So I could. She came back from Hawaii, which I thought was just outstanding and wonderful, and timing is everything. Gosh, I came on board as a board member when Suzanne was the executive director, and I used to work at the Department of Social Services, and I realized, that there was a need when my clients were not able to participate in the work programs because things would happen. When you're battling poverty and lack of education, and then you throw domestic violence in on top of that, it really makes it difficult for people to make changes in their lives. So I became aware of Coastal Women's Shelter by referring clients to Coastal Women's Shelter. And then I got recruited to be on the board, and I think I was a member for 7 years. And then a year or two later, after I left DSS, I came on board as an interim director and served about 4 years. I really can't remember the exact dates.
I know, I run this too.
In a good way. But it's crucial work, absolutely crucial work, and it's complicated work. I'm going to let you say a couple words.
What would I say? I would say domestic violence and Coastal Women's Shelter has evolved. It has evolved into a greater awareness. I was here in the 90s, 1993 or so as the executive director when the O.J. Simpson case happened. That brought huge media attention to domestic violence as well as to the needs in our community. Funding became more ready, ears were more open to hear, people were more available to intervene. It really was an awesome and pivotal time of my career to be involved with domestic violence. It's still a passion of mine. I've moved from many different positions, different jobs, and wherever I go, no matter what I do, domestic violence remains an issue in the family, remains an issue in our community. I have a special place in my heart for Coastal Women's Shelter. I always will, for those that we serve, for all that we do. When I was there in particular, what we did was we opened Helping Hands thrift store down on Pollock Street for the first time. So that was a significant event that occurred during my tenure at Coastal Women's Shelter. I did enjoy it enough. That wasn't the reason why I came back from Hawaii. But when I did come back from Hawaii, Mary Ann wanted to retire, and it worked out, and I stayed again from '06 till about 2010, I think. So I'm pleased to be here. I'm pleased to see the support that Coastal Women's Shelter has, and I look forward to seeing the continued evolution